Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Iran shoots down a U.S. drone in what looks like neutral waters. Are they looking for a war? And there's swarms of earthquakes in the Hayward, California region. Is this a precursor to a big one, or just a phenomenon that takes place right frequently? We're going to be talking about all of that. Plus, the president, in one day, has raised more money than most of the Democrats and all the time they've been in gear combined. Amazing stuff, but tensions are growing as President Trump sends more U.S. troops to the region of the Iranian-Persian Gulf. But as Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson reports, Congress is divided over whether the president has the authority to enter into any further conflict with Iran. Here she is.
Now that tension between the United States and Iran has reached a new high, the talk on the Hill is less about military action and more about Iranian aggression. This week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell still warned the risks of a conflict are very high.
But make no mistake, they're being driven by Tehran's decisions to resort to violence.
McConnell strongly supports the Trump administration's decision to send 1,000 troops as a defense against any further Iranian attacks in the region.
There's no question that Iran is behind the attacks.
Congressman Adam Schiff argues these kinds of attacks were, quote, eminently foreseeable after President Trump pulled out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal.
And the fact that our reneging on the deal hasn't made us safer is part of the proof.
Iran threatens unless sanctions are eased, it will exceed the limit of nuclear fuel allowed in the 2015 Obama-era deal in a matter of days.
It's been our mission since the beginning of this administration to convince the Iranian regime not to move forward with their nuclear program and not to continue to engage in development of their missiles and all the other activities, the malign activities that they've been engaged in around the world.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says for more than a year, the administration kept up pressure with the goal of reestablishing deterrence.
We need to make sure that we continue to do that so that we ultimately get the opportunity to convince Iran that it's not in their best interest to behave in this way.
Reminding everyone this is 40 years of Iranian activity that has led us to this point.
Unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Senator Tom Cotton believes it's time to act, with or without congressional approval.
The policy in Iran has been erratic and opaque. Nobody knows what their plans are and why they're doing what.
While Minority Leader Chuck Schumer acknowledges a problem in Iran, he wants the president to lay out a clear strategy.
As we have learned since the 60s, unless the American people are on board with a strategy, it ultimately is not going to get their support and Congress's support.
Senate Democrats caution the administration against taking action without the support of Congress or our allies. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans were briefed by a top diplomat from the State Department this week on the heightening situation, an offer Leader McConnell says Senate Democrats turned down. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
You know, folks, it is a little strange. The president has abrogated the agreement with Iran to limit their nuclear capabilities, and yet he's holding them to the same standards that were in that treaty, and he says they're exceeding them. That is a little bit opaque, as was said. It's hard to understand exactly what's going on, but it is clear that we have said, and many others have said, Iran can't get a nuclear bomb because it has made clear that if it gets one, it is more than ready to use it against Israel. And they have that strange belief in the Mahdi. And you have to understand that a lot of actions that people take around the world are motivated by their deep-held religious belief. Well, they believe that in the latter days, the Mahdi will come. And the Mahdi will come in the midst of chaos in the world, and he will bring an end to that chaos. But before he comes, there has to be the chaos. And so as they wait for the 12th Imam of the Mahdi, they are more than willing to start blowing people up and to get the conditions for that Muslim savior to come to them. It's a strange belief, but that's what they hold to. So it wouldn't be anybody's, out of anybody's disbelief that the Iranians would want to start a nuclear war. And if they get the bomb, they have made clear they will use it against Israel. So we have to say, and others have to say, we will not let you do that. But at the same time, the president, God bless him, and Mike Pompeo have got to say clearly what our views are, what the parameters are, and what we're asking them to do. Well, in other news, authorities arrested a Syrian refugee for planning an attack on a church in Pittsburgh. John Jessup has more.
That is right, Pat. Officials say the suspect is an ISIS sympathizer who planned to bomb Legacy International Worship Center in revenge, quote, for our brothers in Nigeria. Mustafa Musab Al-Awamir allegedly recorded a video of himself pledging allegiance to ISIS. Prosecutors say the bomb he intended to hide in a backpack and detonate by remote control would have likely killed many people in the surrounding neighborhood, even if the church was empty. Undercover agents say Al-Awamir even suggested leaving a second explosive device to kill Pittsburgh first responders. He has been charged with one count of attempting to provide material support to ISIS, among additional charges. Well, stock market futures surged more than 200 points Thursday on news the Federal Reserve might cut interest rates later this year. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell announced Wednesday it's staying put on its benchmark rate for now and indicated it might lower rates later this year if necessary to strengthen the economy. But the bond market responded negatively, with 10-year Treasury yields falling below 2% for the first time in 2016. Well, President Trump raked in campaign donations after his Tuesday night re-election rollout, taking in nearly $25 million. This as Democratic candidates are taking aim at frontrunner Joe Biden, questioning recent remarks about his ability to work with segregationists in the past. CBN's Jenna Browder reports from Washington.
One day after President Trump launched his re-election campaign, the race is already heating up. Trump raising nearly $25 million within the first 24 hours. This as the Democratic candidates begin to turn on one another.
When's the last time we saw people stand outside for 36 hours in the rain for a political rally? I mean, his supporters are fired up.
Tom Bevan, president of Real Clear Politics, tells CBN's Faith Nation the enthusiasm among Trump supporters and the money they're giving his campaign are both good signs.
The irony of President Trump is he also fires up the Democrats in an unprecedented way.
On the campaign trail, Trump will address some of his strongest supporters next week at Ralph Reed's Road to Majority.
He's been focused like a laser beam on the faith vote. And he's on the issues that are a priority to them. He's made promises and he's kept those promises.
Meanwhile, Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden is facing headwinds after comments he made about working with segregationist senators in the past.
I disagreed with the views of the segregationists. The point I'm making is you don't have to agree.
Biden's words receiving sharp criticism from Kamala Harris and others.
To coddle the reputations of segregationists, of people who, if they had their way, I would literally not be standing here as a member of the United States Senate, is, I think, it's misinformed and it's wrong.
And Republicans taking heat, too, as Congress holds hearings for slavery reparations. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell making this statement.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've, tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president.
For a century after the Civil War, black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell.
Also today, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee are frustrated after former White House aide Hope Hicks refused to answer questions about possible obstruction of justice regarding President Trump and the Russia investigation. President Trump insisting her work as a senior White House aide was protected. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. Pat, back to you.
You know, this whole idea of reparations is literally insane. There's no, as Mitch McConnell said, there's nobody living today who had anything to do with slavery or the oppression of black people back before the Civil War. And if reparations are paid, how much are to be paid, and to whom are they to be paid? Who is the beneficiary of this? A bunch of people who've just been born recently are going to pick up a windfall sometime in the trillions of dollars. How do you add it up? How do you count it up? What is the metric that is being used? Nobody knows that. The whole thing is absurd. And to criticize Mitch McConnell because of his stand is just ridiculous. He's doing the right thing, and no thinking person today should really expect reparations to be paid for something that was done 100, 150 years ago. Makes no sense. It can't be done. John?
Had some troubling news to report. Suicide among 15 to 24-year-olds is at its highest level in 20 years. A new report in the American Medical Association says it's the second leading cause of death in the age group behind auto accidents. CBN health reporter Lori Johnson looks at some of the possible causes behind this troubling trend.
Out of every 100,000 young people between the ages of 15 and 24, 14 commit suicide, a sharp increase over previous years. Experts cite a number of underlying causes for this upward trend. The CDC points to drug use, street drugs like heroin, but also ones okayed by a doctor. An alarming 200 prescription medications list depressive symptoms or suicidal thinking as possible side effects. And the risk of suicide increases with the number of these prescriptions a person takes.
Any drug that is affecting your mind, your mood, your feelings has the potential to cause a disaster. Most of the school shooters have been on psychiatric drugs, and a great number of them were on psychiatric drugs at the time or shortly before they committed violence. And violence and suicide go together. It's, are you going to turn your rage out, or are you going to turn your rage inward?
Social media also comes under fire because studies show it increases the risk for depression, anxiety, and bullying. Christian psychiatrist Daniel Amen is particularly concerned about youngsters on these platforms, warning that parental controls can give a false sense of security.
So even if it's safe, what it's doing is setting them up to spend more and more time on it as they grow. And all the research I know says that's a bad thing.
As the president of the American Association of Christian Counselors, Dr. Tim Clinton says people of faith need to face the reality of suicidal depression in their community.
The church, the community of believers out there need to get more serious about mental health related issues and themes in everyday life. We need to bring this to the front and center, the forefront of the church.
Suicide warning signs include talking about suicide or feelings of hopelessness, contacting people to say goodbye, and giving things away. If you or someone you love struggles with suicidal thoughts, free anonymous help is available anytime by calling 1-800-273-TALK. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Pat?
We've been talking about that swarm of earthquakes. Normally speaking, a bunch of tremors has a tendency to alleviate some of the stresses that would cause a big earthquake. And so this is not the sign of the big one coming. It may be the sign of the big one being alleviated. But on the other hand, there are people who think that if there's a big swarm of earthquakes, it's a precursor to the big one. And we've all been waiting for the big one that's going to break over the Los Angeles area. They've had them up in San Francisco, but when you've got the several fault lines that run through California, it is an earthquake zone, and it is a thing that needs to be taken care of, and it can't be ignored. But here's the story about what's happening right now in Hayward, California. John?
Pat, the swarm of earthquakes you're talking about hit Southern California over the last 3 weeks, covering an area of less than 1 square mile in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. Residents say they have felt the shaking and wonder if a big one is coming, but geological researchers say there's a slim chance there will be a larger quake. The swarms have an average magnitude of 3.0. And Pat, this area is right along that ring of fire that you talk about.
Sure is. And the Earth is, you know, we have these big plates. There's a magma underneath us, and the plates float on the magma. And there's a North American plate, there's a Pacific plate, and so forth. And they come together, and if they break apart just a little bit, then all of a sudden you've got a big fracture, and you've got all kinds of terrible things happening, especially in a modern city. And a lot of our architecture has not been prepared to withstand a quake. Well-built structures usually stand up, and the damages from things that hit people when the buildings fall or when furniture falls and so forth. But it's very scary to undertake one of those things. And when that north side earthquake hit, my son Tim was in it and started shaking, and it was a scary situation.
Have you ever been in an earthquake?
I was in one in Israel. I was in a bed, asleep, and all of a sudden I felt this bump behind me, and I didn't know what was the matter, and the curtain started shaking. It was an earthquake, but it was far enough away so it didn't affect me any.
I felt one I was in Arizona.
Really?
And living right on the border of California. And back then, it was my first TV job. Slept on a mattress on the floor. So when the earthquake came, it felt like something came into the mattress like this.
Wow.
And it felt like a roller coaster. And my roommate and I, we ran out into the middle. Her bedroom was here and mine was here. We ran out into the middle and hugged each other. And it was really scary because that was my first and only earthquake.
Yeah, well, I'd just as soon stay away from them, but some of them can be very, very devastating. And of course, when you look at some of the fictional movies that have been about earthquakes, but it could be that, parts of California with that San Andreas fault, it could be significant enough that you could have a large portion of a state opening up and the ocean coming in. So, but right now we haven't had any of that, and I hope we never do have to.